Book Nibbles. Big Ideas, Small Bites. The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga is presented as a dialogue, a philosophical conversation between a wise philosopher and a skeptical young man. The structure mirrors the classical Socratic dialogues, where questions and objections spark deeper explanations. At its heart, the book is an introduction to the ideas of Alfred Adler, the early 20th century psychologist who developed a school of thought distinct from Freud and Jung. While Freud emphasized trauma and unconscious drives, and Jung explored archetypes and collective symbols, Adler argued for something much simpler and more empowering: that people are not defined by their past but by the meanings they give to it and the goals they pursue in the present. This message, that one can choose freedom at any moment by reframing life, sits at the center of the book and gives it both its provocation and its hope. The dialogue begins with the young man, cynical and restless, demanding answers to life's dissatisfaction. He insists that trauma, society, and circumstances weigh heavily on him and others, making it impossible to simply choose happiness. The philosopher, calm and steady, pushes back, arguing that this belief in determinism is itself the greatest barrier to freedom. Adlerian psychology, he explains, is built on the principle that people are not controlled by past causes but guided by the purposes they assign to events. To illustrate, he uses the example of someone who claims to avoid social gatherings because they have social anxiety caused by past bullying. In Adler's terms, the anxiety is not truly a result of the past. Rather, the person is choosing to avoid social interaction now, and the past is being used as a justification. The purpose of their anxiety is to protect them from the risk of rejection, not to punish them for past pain. This inversion, that behavior is goal-driven rather than cause-driven, is shocking to the young man, who initially resists what feels like a dismissal of real suffering. The philosopher does not deny pain, but he insists on reframing it. Trauma is real, but its meaning is constructed, and meaning can be changed. Adler famously said, "No experience is in itself a cause of success or failure. We do not suffer from the shock of our experiences, but we make out of them whatever suits our purposes." In other words, two people can endure similar hardships, yet one grows stronger while the other feels trapped. The difference lies in the interpretations and purposes assigned. This insight is both liberating and unsettling. If the past does not dictate the present, then excuses rooted in the past dissolve, leaving one with the responsibility of choosing differently. The philosopher stresses that this is not about blame but about freedom. If you are not bound by the past, then you are free right now to act differently. The conversation moves toward the question of happiness. The young man claims that happiness is an illusion, reserved for the lucky or privileged, while most people are doomed to dissatisfaction. The philosopher disagrees, insisting that happiness is not found in external validation or worldly success, but in relationships based on what Adler called community feeling or social interest. To live well is to live in harmony with others, to contribute, and to feel oneself part of a larger web of humanity. The philosopher offers a thought experiment. Imagine someone who pursues endless wealth or fame. Even if they achieve these goals, they often remain anxious, comparing themselves to others, fearing loss, and chasing more. True happiness, Adler suggested, comes not from being superior to others, but from living in equality and connection with them. This challenges the young man's competitive worldview. He insists that life is a contest, that people constantly measure themselves against peers. The philosopher counters that comparison is itself the problem. In Adlerian psychology, there is no need to rank human worth. A person who chooses to step outside of competition, to stop measuring themselves by other standards, experiences a radical shift in freedom. He gives an example. Suppose you feel inferior because your friend earns more money. That feeling is born not of your financial status, but of comparison. If you stopped comparing, your life might feel entirely sufficient. The philosopher calls this the inferiority complex, a distortion that occurs when people use feelings of inferiority as excuses for not changing their lives. For instance, someone might say, "I can't succeed because I didn't go to the right school," or "I can't find love because I'm not attractive." These excuses allow people to avoid risk while maintaining a sense of justification. But genuine inferiority, in Adler's sense, can be a positive driver. Feeling I'm not yet skilled enough can motivate learning and growth. The key is to use inferiority as a spur, not a cage. The young man pushes back with the problem of interpersonal conflict. How can one be happy when constantly hurt by others' judgments? The philosopher introduces one of Adler's most powerful concepts, the separation of tasks. Much of human unhappiness comes from entangling ourselves in tasks that are not ours to control. For example, a parent may try to dictate a child's career, or a worker may agonize over whether their boss likes them. But according to Adler, each person has their own tasks, and we should not interfere with others' responsibilities nor hand over our own. The child's career is the child's task. Whether your boss likes you is your boss's task, not yours. Your task is to do your work with integrity. By identifying whose task a problem truly belongs to, one can free themselves from unnecessary suffering. The philosopher illustrates with a vivid story. Imagine a child refuses to study. The parent insists, threatens, and becomes anxious. But ultimately, whether the child studies or not is the child's task, because it is their life that will bear the consequences. The parent's role is to provide support, encouragement, and structure, but not to take on the task itself. If the parent claims the child's task, conflict ensues. By letting go of what is not theirs, people find surprising freedom. This principle applies broadly. If someone dislikes you, that is their task, not yours. Your task is how you live, not how others perceive you. This leads to the book's title theme, the courage to be disliked. Most people, Adler argued, live lives constrained by the desire for approval. We act to be praised, to avoid rejection, to fit in. But this makes us prisoners of others' tasks. The philosopher tells the young man that true freedom comes only when one accepts the risk of being disliked. To live authentically, to act according to your convictions and values, means that inevitably someone will disapprove. Trying to please everyone is impossible, and pursuing universal approval leads to a life of self-betrayal. The courage to be disliked is not arrogance or selfishness, it is the willingness to prioritize authenticity over popularity. The young man protests, "Isn't this selfish? Isn't caring about others essential?" The philosopher clarifies, the courage to be disliked is not about ignoring others, but about engaging in relationships as equals rather than manipulators. If you act kindly to be praised, you are not truly kind, you are trading kindness for approval. Genuine kindness arises when you act from contribution, not from fear or neediness. Adler called this horizontal relationships, connections of equality, in contrast to vertical relationships built on hierarchy and superiority. In horizontal relationships, no one is above or below, everyone stands as fellow humans. The philosopher insists this shift is the path to real community and happiness. The discussion turns to freedom and responsibility. Many people say they cannot change because of circumstances, their upbringing, their society, their wounds. The philosopher insists this is an illusion. People cling to excuses because freedom is terrifying. To be free means to accept responsibility for your choices right now. Even saying, "I am this way because of trauma," is a way of avoiding the risk of change. The philosopher illustrates with another story, a man who refuses to leave his house, claiming he is traumatized by past humiliation. Adler would argue that the real reason is that he does not want to face the risks of social interaction, so he uses trauma as justification. The philosopher is not denying the man's pain but pointing out that as long as he interprets his past as destiny, he will never take the step into freedom. This provokes anger in the young man, who accuses the philosopher of heartlessness. But the philosopher insists that compassion comes from respecting others' freedom. To pity someone as a victim of their past is to rob them of agency. To affirm that they can choose differently right now is to respect their dignity. This is radical compassion, grounded in belief in the other person's power. Gradually, the dialogue shifts toward practical application. The philosopher explains that one can begin living differently by changing one's orientation toward life's tasks, work, friendship, and love. In each area, happiness comes from contribution rather than comparison. In work, instead of seeking praise or superiority, one should focus on how their efforts help others. In friendship, instead of using relationships for status or validation, one should aim to build equal bonds of trust. In love, instead of control or dependency, one should aim for partnership where both accept each other's freedom. These orientations require constant practice but lead to liberation from anxiety and resentment. The philosopher offers another metaphor: life is like being on a stage. Many people live as if an audience is always watching, judging their performance. They adjust their lines, their gestures, their choices, to win applause. But in truth, no such audience exists. Everyone else is too busy with their own tasks to watch you. Once you realize this, you are free to act not for spectators, but for yourself and those you choose to engage with authentically. The young man is startled by this but begins to see the appeal. If life is not a performance, then he can stop pretending. Toward the end of the dialogue, the philosopher presents Adler's idea of life as a series of moments lived in the here and now. The past is unchangeable, the future unknowable. What matters is how one chooses to live this moment. This aligns with the book's recurring insistence on freedom. You are free now, not later, and happiness is found not in achieving some distant goal but in fully engaging in the present. The young man reflects on his obsession with proving himself, with winning recognition, with avoiding judgment. He begins to see that all of this has kept him from living now. The final insight the philosopher offers is that happiness is not something to pursue directly, but something that emerges when we forget ourselves in contribution to others. This does not mean sacrifice or self-erasure, but rather recognizing that life's meaning is relational. A person who lives only for themselves becomes isolated and anxious, always protecting their ego. A person who lives to contribute experiences connection and significance. The courage to be disliked, then, is also the courage to live for contribution rather than applause. By the close of the dialogue, the young man is not entirely convinced. His skepticism lingers, but he is shaken. The philosopher has planted seeds of doubt in his old worldview and opened the possibility of another way of living. The book ends without easy resolution, reflecting the truth that adopting these ideas is not about intellectual agreement but about daily practice. The courage to be disliked is not a theory, but a choice one must make again and again in life. The courage to be disliked challenges readers to rethink trauma, comparison, relationships, and happiness. It insists that freedom is available to everyone, but only if they are willing to give up excuses, accept responsibility, and risk the disapproval of others. Its dialogue format makes it accessible, as the young man voices the doubts many readers feel, while the philosopher patiently unfolds Adler's psychology in plain terms. The book's power lies not in offering quick fixes but in presenting a radical reorientation, that happiness is not about winning approval or escaping pain, but about living authentically, contributing to others, and embracing the freedom of the present moment. And that's it. The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. Thanks for listening to Book Nibbles. If you enjoyed this bite-sized book, don't forget to subscribe for more quick, insightful summaries. See you in the next nibble.